What's up, everybody? Welcome in another new edition of Celtics Beat, and we are continuing on with what really has been just an astounding, a fun run of just supreme guest after supreme guest. I am Adam Kaufman. Of course, you're tired of me. You're used to me, Evan Valenti. No disrespect to him, the same deal. But we bring in a guy who's a friend of this show, and of course, if anyone has had the inside track on the Celtics and blowing up Danny Ainge's phone and so on and so forth over the years is none other than Steve Bulpett. Welcome back to the program.
Thanks. Good to speak with you.
It's good to have you here, Steve. Now, obviously, we talked to you, I don't know, a few months back, whatever it was, and great conversation about things that were happening with the Celtics at the time. As we know, much has changed since then with Brad Stevens no longer being the head coach, being elevated to the president of basketball operations. Danny Ainge is exploring retirement. I mean, he's no longer with the C's, short of the transition, helping Brad along. Eventually, maybe he'll find his way somewhere else. What I'm wondering, because like I said, I mean, you have often been credited with being the, kind of the inside man, the guy that knows things before other people knows things with regard to Danny Ainge. Since, obviously you're not day-to-day actively reporting right now as you did for so long, how long were you sitting on this? How long did you know this and you just didn't put it out there?
Oh, for years. I knew he was going to retire at some point. No, I mean, I haven't had real contact with Danny, I occasionally get a golf text from him or something, but no, it came out of left field. And, Danny stepping down and Brad moving up, both parts of that equation, I think, were surprising to most.
The latter part of that, obviously, Brad being elevated, because I think, generally speaking, like you knew it was coming. Like you said, I mean, Danny was going to retire at some point, and obviously the health concerns in the past. I don't think a lot of people were floored by Danny stepping aside, but obviously Brad going from head coach, which is something he had never done at the NBA level before he got to Boston, to Pobo, which is something he's never done anywhere. I mean, he recruited at Butler, but that's worlds different than effectively running an NBA organization. How much did that, as you said, come out of left field for you? And how do you think he's going to do with the job?
Well, yeah, I think it was surprising. I think, along with a lot of people, picture Brad as a coach, and I find it hard to believe that he doesn't find his way back to a bench. I can't picture him not coaching again. So, that part was a surprise. As far as the difference between college and pro, running a program. I mean, at certain schools in the NCAA, the only difference is the salary cap's a lot looser. Yeah, I mean, if just looking at Brad, the person, and how he approaches work, then you'd have to think that it's likely he's not going to leave any stone unturned. So, I would expect. I guess you would think that his chances for success in a new role would have to be pretty good, just because of the way he's going to approach things. But the best thing you could say about Ainge in running the operation was he never did his job to keep his job. I know I've written that a bunch of times, but you look around the league at GMs from other teams, and that they're worried about whether they're going to keep their job or not. And sometimes that paralyzes teams. If I make a move and it doesn't work out, then it's my fault. If I don't make a move and we continue to stink, we can blame the coach. There's stuff like that happens. And you see GMs get very defensive about stuff. I mean, if you'd have told Ainge 4 or 5 years ago, hey, you're fired, whatever money that he would lose in that equation, he could more than make up, taking money off of Bruce Hurst on the golf course.
Not to mention find another job running a team if he wanted to at the time. Heck, if he wanted to right now, I'm sure he could find that job. But I guess if there's one thing about Brad, it's that and there are so many great qualities about Brad, and this, quite frankly, is a very good quality about Brad, but you can look at it from a couple of different angles, which is that he's so methodical. He's so deliberate in his thought process, maybe in some ways a little slow to change, slow to evolve. I know it's frustrated people in terms of his work on the sidelines over the years. When it comes to running a team, you can't help but think about, and you could speak to this obviously better than Evan or I could, so I'm curious as to your thoughts. Right now, I mean, he's got a number of things to consider this offseason, but number one, the top priority right now is finding a new head coach. This transition happened, which, wasn't that long ago. There were a couple openings in the NBA. Now there are 6 teams that need new head coaches, and quite frankly, it's possible that Milwaukee and Atlanta are going to get added to that list. So how deliberate does Brad have time to be, or the organization have time to be, in terms of a widespread search to nail that person?
Well, I don't think he's dragging feet on this. I don't think that's a concern. I think there's a very good chance that that the people that some of the main people he's considering are currently working, are currently busy with playoff games, etc. So I think that plays into it. And as far as the Celtics, perhaps I guess what you're alluding to would be missing out on somebody. You know, you look at around the league at the job openings, potential, even the potential to a very attractive position. You've got 2 guys under contract in their all-stars in their early 20s. If you're a coach or a coach who's in desire from other teams, if you're the Celtics, that's a pretty good selling point. A coach is going to want to go where he can succeed or she can succeed. And the Celtics, for all their issues this past season, when you look around the league, and as much as you were frustrated by this season, look around the league and tell me how many other teams you'd rather be than the Boston Celtics. There are some certainly, and there are some certainly in this moment. But when you look at the bigger picture, take a step back and look 5 years and tell me how many teams you'd rather be than the Celtics. And so I'm saying is that whereas they've got work to do, and when people who follow the team, fans, etc., look at them, they see, damn, it's not this, they're not this or that. But taking a step back, there's, they're in a pretty good position relative to other teams.
The one thing too, if you look at this particular group, you look at Celtics ownership, you look at, what the front office might look like when they're done. I think we all assume at this point that Zarin is probably going to get elevated to some whatever status, and we'll see what happens with Austin Ainge and the rest of the group. But the one thing I think, if you're an incoming coach, or you're at least looking at the Celtics in terms of this could be my next job, there's a little loyalty factor here that I think that might play into this thing. Boston, their ownership group and who they've been able to retain, that seems to be like they're pretty loyal, maybe to a fault. You can maybe say that. Maybe they've put a lot of stock into Danny and letting him do his thing and being hands off, which I think a lot of ownership groups sometimes, they get in a little bit of trouble with meddling too much in the basketball operations side of things. You can at least say this is a group that, lets the people that they hire run the show. And if you're an incoming, head coach, you look at, Danny's been there for, was there for a long time. Brad, he just elevated. He's been there for a long time. This is a job that maybe you'll be able to grow with, in addition to the fact that you've talked about they have 2 young all-stars who are, and especially in Jason Tatum, who's, you look at some other players on the league right now, and you look at him and say, man, he is one of like the very few guys I would love to build a team around and have in my back pocket. Is there a particular candidate that has been in discussion here, Steve, that you like? I mean, there's some guys that we know about, the Sam Cassell's, the Chauncey Billups, Kara Lawson, obviously, formerly with the team, the Ime Udoka, choice. I don't know a lot about him, so I've been trying to, peruse the internet a little bit, trying to find out more about him and his coaching style and where he's come from. And you find out the San Antonio tree is not too far away from him. Is there a favorite candidate that you've been able to kind of look at the landscape and say, yeah, that's the guy I think that makes the most sense for this Celtics team?
Well, there are some candidates like Ime Udoka, who I don't really know. But a lot of the other candidates I've spoken to over the years, sometimes a lot. So again, not knowing that there may be Udoka may be the guy that is in Brad's mind. And remember too that San Antonio. So yeah, I'm sure they're talking about this situation. But the two people, again, not knowing everything here to know there may be a better candidate than one of the two I'm going to mention. But the two that I think, if the Celtics came away with either of them, they'd be in a really good situation. And Chauncey Billups would be one of them. This is a thoughtful guy. This is a bright guy who understands the game and understands perception and situations. Because let's face it, when you're the head coach and you're speaking every day, sometimes at shoot around, pregame, postgame, everything you say is going to get parsed in the media, by fans, talk radio, all that stuff. So someone like a Chauncey Billups, his basketball knowledge and the gravitas that he has with his experience, I think he'd be a great choice. And I think he's a really hot candidate around the league. I think if he wants to be a head coach next season, he will be a head coach in the NBA. The other person that I would put with many of the similar qualities, and this would be a going bold move, would be Carol Lawson. And that's not just from the conversations I've had with her. I did a story about her when she first came in. I remember talking to her in Las Vegas for some time. But I mentioned her name largely because, and assistant coaches can be kind of behind the scenes on NBA teams, even with the Celtics. A lot of teams don't allow their assistant coaches to speak with media on the record and things. So a lot of those assistant coaches are wary about, chatting up media. Kara wasn't like a, hey, how are you kind of person. But speaking with the players about her, she really impressed the players. And if you look, it's not necessarily right, but it's the way it is. When you're a woman walking into one of these situations, you've got a quote unquote burden of proof because you're coming into a field that has been dominated by men. But Carol Lawson, with her basketball knowledge, was very, very impressive. And I think just the way the relationship she built with the players in terms of their work and all those things and working with them, I think really stuck out. I think she'd be a great candidate here or elsewhere. If you're going to go with a woman in this situation, if you're going to be bold, which I think would be a really cool idea, not just for like, hey, look, we're being bold, but because they're qualified people. Mm-hmm. And if you look at the Celtics history, this is a franchise that's not been afraid to be bold. First all black starting five, Bill Russell as coach, and these things worked out pretty well. But Becky Hammon, she's a real basketball person. I remember her as a player, and her coach was Richie Adubato in WNBA, who was a friend of mine. And back when she was playing, he and I would be talking, and he'd be raving about her. And I know she'll get her opportunity at some point. And when she does, let me give you a little tip here. I'm not sure if sports betting will be legal in Massachusetts or not, but it'll be worth a flight to Vegas and find out her team's total for the season and take the over.
This as well as anybody, obviously having covered the league and been a reliable voice in doing so, and this team obviously for as long as you have been, that there's a beauty and a burden to obviously reporting, especially when it comes to others like us in the media or fans that are just trying to decipher what's true, what's not, what can you depend upon. Knowing this organization as you do, knowing this ownership group as you do, maybe even if there's any influence, knowing Danny Ainge as you do, the wild card here is this is Brad Stevens, decision. Short of ownership having to sign off on it, he's going to pick this person. I'm assuming Wick and company are going to go along with it. And, we don't know, obviously, how Brad is going to think in this role, but there are all sorts of reports that have come out in the last week, 2 weeks, however long it's been at this point, Steve, that it's the Celtics' top priority for its next head coach is this. Now it's, being bold. It's a woman. It's a Black person. It's a former player. It's a current assistant. It's, whoever Jason Tatum wants. It's like, you name it, obviously. What do you believe this organization's priority is? What is Brad Stevens looking for in his team's next head coach?
Well, in terms of pressures and what you talked about, I will say this about Brad. He's going to be Brad. And I think you'd sooner see him walk away from the situation than be pressured into doing something that he didn't want to do. In the years I've known him, all I can tell you is he's been incredibly straight up. When he got the job, when we came to Boston and we met, I took him to lunch. The Herald took him to lunch. And I think it was the cost of that lunch that really got me in trouble. No. But we went to Union Oyster House and sat and had and ate. And, I figured I'd take him to the oldest restaurant like in America, just to get him a feel for Boston and the idea. We talked basketball for like a long time. We're, for better or for worse, I'm a basketball person. I was talking to Brad and Spider comes in and sits down with his wife away from us. I give him a wave. And I said to Brad, I said, by the way, that guy over there is more famous than you around the Celtics. Yeah, what does he do? I go, well, during the timeouts, he comes out with a mop. I mean, but look, Rudy Edwards was a basketball star in Boston. Okay, I mean, it was a star when he was a player. But I said, he comes out and everybody, yells for Spider. And, I go, and he's just, but I think what the story tells is that there's stuff that's ingrained, there's stuff that stays. We're sitting in perhaps the oldest restaurant in America. Stuff in Boston stays and carries on and carries meaning. And Spider was as much part of the organization as anybody. And, I think Brad understands stuff, and it's just we've kind of gotten off the field here, but he understands the Celtic situation and understands the obligations he has within it. He's not going to do anything that's going to hurt or, he's not going to do anything just to try to, make himself look good.
Sure.
He's got his head screwed on better than a lot of people, better than most people that I've seen in this game over the billion years that I've been around it.
So what do you think, Brad, knowing obviously, like you said, Brad is going to, it's his ammunition. He's going to hire who he thinks is best for the job. External noise be damned. Having been in that locker room, having coached them for the last 8 years, does he feel like, in just your estimation, I don't expect you to know, does he feel like what so many others have been saying, like what this team needs is a guy who's done it, is a guy who's been there? And I don't necessarily mean a retread head coach or just a guy who has head coaching experience, like a Chauncey Billups, like a player, a guy who's done everything with regard to playing, was, a high first round pick, obviously, was a guy that needed multiple stops to really find his footing, was someone that became an all-star, an all NBA guy, a champion, the best player on a championship team, a finals MVP, a potential Hall of Famer, but, well-traveled and a journeyman at the same time. Do they need a guy like that? A guy like Sam Cassell, Carol Lawson, obviously a longtime successful player, someone who's been through the ringer versus someone like Brad who hasn't done it at a high level?
I think Brad is probably going to look for someone that's going to grab the player's attention. You look back at this year and, I think I probably said it with you, and I know I've said it elsewhere, and I know I've tweeted about it. but the Celtics this season, I put this season on, and look, the injuries were clearly a factor. Not having your team together to be able to develop chemistry, and not just the chemistry getting along thing, which they did, but the chemistry of playing together and playing instinctively together, that was a huge factor. But I put this year, I don't look at this year as a Brad Stevens problem. If you need a coach to be giving you a rah-rah speech every game, then as a player, are you really cut out for this if you need that cattle prod each game? If you've got a coach who is putting you in the right positions to succeed, not only and you know that this works, not only for the team, but for your own individual interests as well. I mean, ball movement, players cutting to open things up for other people eventually benefits you too. As great as Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown and all these guys were this year individually, how much better would they be if they were just catching and finishing at the rim instead of having to drive through 2 people or 3 people or get up a tough contested shot. So, I look at this as the players having to, give it up and say, okay, I'm going to cut, and I know I'm not going to get the ball, but it's going to create movement in the defense. It's going to benefit us in this possession. So I was, thinking that this was their situation to deal with, the players. Now going forward, I would be willing to guarantee you that whoever the next coach is, this team will get a bump next season because human nature. Players know. I mean, you saw it in Atlanta. Lloyd Pierce was and is a good coach. Nate McMillan was a good coach, when he was let go in his previous stops. Mm-hmm. But they know when a coaching change happens, that if they play well coming out of that the credit will go to the new coach, and whatever happened before, even if it was their fault, will get blamed on the previous guy. So I would expect that the Celtics were going to get, they're going to come out next year. Who knows what the roster will look like, et cetera. But the guys who were here, I'm kind of going off here, but the one other thing I want to get in, and again, I've talked about this a bunch with people. You look at the defensive problems the Celtics had this year, and a lot of it, especially in NBA, is defensive scheme, is, how do we rotate? When do we rotate? When do we bring the double? And that's stuff that's got to happen really in practice through reps, through repetition. You can have a film session, not the same. And this year, limited preseason, almost negligible time to practice during the year. So that was going to be a problem. The proper scheme defensively and getting guys into the right spots was going to be something you had to overcome. Having said that, there is not an excuse for the Celtics not getting into the ball handler more, not being more aggressive on the ball handler, guard your yard, get into the guy so that the opposition starts its offense later in the clock, has less time to get you and scramble, get you running around, and just be tougher that way. And that's not only my opinion. You listen to the players during the year, and they admitted that. Mm-hmm. Came from Evan Fournier when he said after a game, there's I'm paraphrasing. He said, there's a problem when things improve for you dramatically just because you tried harder. Yeah. I mean, if that doesn't say, look, this was a player thing and not a coaching thing, there it is. I mean, and I've again said before, it's not necessarily guys being jerks. I'm not ripping on these guys. Literally, it's a case where things will be going poorly for the Celtics in a situation, in a stretch of the game. And players will be like, okay, things are going bad. I'm going to take responsibility. I'm going to make a play here. And that's admirable. It makes things more difficult.
Hi guys, Cedric Maxwell here. I want to take a minute to tell you about Marigold Medical. I'm used to keeping my body in great shape, but with arthritis, even the most simple everyday tasks became unbearable. As soon as I called Marigold Medical, I knew I was in good hands. No drugs, no surgery, just an experienced team of caring professionals that wanted to get me back to doing the things I love. Make the call to Marigold Medical and get back to pain-free life.
So, Evan, I don't want people out there to think we've just had you muted this entire time. I'm sure there's plenty on your mind as well. What do you got?
Well, we talk about players, right? And you're talking about, again, I was always maintaining it was really kind of a roster problem. When it comes to the Celtics struggles this year, I've been pretty adamant about that. I mean, you can definitely throw some on the players too, just because, I go back to that one quote of Brad, on the sidelines, audibly yelling on television, just like, it's just a very loud move, or like, I forget the exact quote, but like, it's not like Brad wasn't telling guys not to cut or telling guys to, hold the ball for too long. But I do think, part of this is a roster construction problem. As much as people want to dump on the players a little bit, when Jason Tatum's out there with Grant Williams, Semi Ojeleye, Carson Edwards, name the list, right? It's hard for him to get the kind of spacing that he needs to kind of go to work, or a guy like Jaylen Brown that needs the space that he needs to go to work, or to kick it out to an open shooter, or have you. But this team does have a roster problem, and what I've come to sort of think is, you have Danny stocked this team with young guys at the end of the bench, hoping for some improvement throughout the season, and sometimes that works out. You get Aaron Nesmith, who couldn't play because he didn't know how to play NBA defense and work with the Celtics rotations to start the year. Then by the end of the year, he's shooting 40-50% from three, giving them a ton of energy on both sides of the ball, and emerges as a real player for them. Payne Pritchard from the jump was a really great find, and was a 40% three-point shooter, and was one of the few guys that picked guys up full court. And as you mentioned, Steve, one of the few guys that really got into the chest of the ball handler, whoever his assignment was. So it was fun to watch that. But then at the end of the bench, you have guys that they've struck out on. I'm not willing to give up on Grant Williams yet. There are some days where he looks really great, some days where he has no clue. And they're at the end of the bench, Taco Fall, Tremont Waters, Carson Edwards. It doesn't really help you. Philosophically, from a philosophy standpoint, sometimes you want to put, vets down there, because guys that know what they're doing and have been there, done that sort of thing. And I think there might have been a clash, if you will, in terms of what Brad is looking for in terms of, guys to go to at the end of the bench. And I looked at that saying, like, look, this is clearly a team that's very top heavy. And, outside of Evan Fournier, that bench is really, really shallow. Going forward here, do you think that's a major priority for the Celtics? Is it not as a major priority as we think? What is your outlook, Steve, in terms of roster movement, what the Celtics have to prioritize this offseason?
Well, first of all, I'd look at this year in terms of like you said, roster construction. And okay, you've got Jason Tatum, Jaylen Brown, Rob Williams, Marcus Smart, Kemba Walker. That's your starting five. And now, what's coming off your bench after that? Evan Fournier, Aaron Nesmith, Peyton Pritchard, who is very good in terms of his role. Tristan Thompson, who, while not, had an up and down season, is one of those veterans and a banger type of person. So I guess what I'm kind of challenging your basic point, which is, it wasn't bad. I think you were really hurt about the Romeo Langford situation. Really hurt you badly, because he was a guy that, while he hadn't played a ton, still had the experience of being around and knowing where he was supposed to be. And you can see that he can do some things while healthy. And defensively, he was one of those kind of guys that Brad was really kind of like, I'm sure, I wasn't there, but I'm sure when Brad heard about like Romeo coming back from the wrist surgery and then getting COVID, I'm sure that Brad's pillow took a pounding. There were probably a couple of tears on it as well. But so you look at that, but talking about the end of the roster, look at you mentioned, Taco. He's a two-way player. Yeah, there's some guys at the end of the roster that, I've seen them enough, and I don't think they should be around necessarily. But you look at the end of any roster. I mean, go around the league, to pick up the playoff teams right now and go to the end of their roster and see how many names you haven't even heard of. It's like, whoa, this guy's in the NBA. So there's that too. Having said that, I do think there are opportunities that the Celtics have had over the years to pick up a veteran guy, and haven't. And I thought, it's been like a case here or there. And I'm not sure how much the Celtics, and this is something I don't know, and I'm not sure we're ever going to find the answer to. I know a year before this, last year, I remember talking with Ainge and saying, Jamal Crawford, this is a no-brainer. You need to pick this guy up. He's not only a guy that can come in the game, get hot, and give you a bunch of points, but he's also one of the elite leadership, locker room, helping guys along people that's the game has ever seen. And the response basically was that he wouldn't get enough minutes to make it worthwhile. And, we agreed to disagree. And I didn't even get a vote on that.
Do you believe that?
Ridiculous.
You think, all those years, anyway, but give me a healthy roster and then fill guys in, you know what I mean? They've had guys look at, and everything is context, right? How good is a guy? Who's he on the floor? Yeah, it's probably time to move on from Shemi Ojale. But I will say this, offensively, he was parked in a corner, right? And the idea was he's there to spread the floor. Now, if the ball's moving and he's getting touches and the ball's, then he's involved, he's in rhythm. But when he's standing in the corner waiting and he hasn't touched the ball for 3 possessions, and all of a sudden it gets tossed to him in the corner and he's got room to shoot, the closeout coming to him is slow. Is he in rhythm to shoot? Well, have you not decreased the odds of that shot going in? Let's go back to last year's team. Gordon Hayward, people were kind of cracking on him because he's making a lot of money and he's not scoring a billion points. But if you look at his numbers versus with his usage rate, it was incredible. And not only that, but he was a guy that the ball moved. He was going to make the right play. He was going to keep the ball moving. I've got it in my hands. I'm not going to leave it here. It's going to move. There's a value to it because it takes the attention of the defense. They have to honor that cut. And, you go back to a billion years ago, Larry Bird was a better shooter because he had a little extra space to shoot because his guy had to be wary about Kevin McHale in the post. Similarly, Kevin McHale was better in the post because the guy guarding Larry, if they were on the same side of the floor, had to be slow to double down because that's Larry Bird over there. So, everything, everything in context. Larry, the Larry Bird Dominique shootout in '88 happens at least in large part, or at least in part because Kevin McHale had played on a broken foot in the '87 playoffs. And in the days prior to that, he was the guy who guarded Dominique when the Celtics played the Hawks. Parrish guarded Kevin Willis. Larry guarded Tree Rollins, who was basically in the witness protection program as far as getting the ball for the Hawks. So, I mean, that all played into it. I mean, Larry Bird could roam and get steals. Now, if he's got to guard Dominique Moore, you know, that's different than Kevin McHale, you know, one of the league's better defenders. He was this, you know, Herman Munster guy with the arms out here. And, you know, so, I mean, I'm giving you like 80,000 word answers to a question that
it's all connected. And that's, it's not just one. And this is the thing that, you know, we had Grandy on months ago, you know, we've, you know, various different points of the season have said it. It's like, what's so frustrating about the 2020-2021 Celtics team is it's not just one thing. It's if you have to really sit back and look at the entire picture. There are times you can blame Brad Stevens. There are times you can blame Danny Ainge, and there are times you can blame the players on the floor. Like, as much as people want to throw shade at Brad's not on the floor shooting. Neither is Danny Ainge. Right? The guys on the floor, they're the guys that are supposed to execute the game plan, so to speak. So I think your more elaborate point here is a lot of times when there are problems in an NBA franchise, when a team underachieves like the Celtics do, because they have so much talent, and you look at the playoffs right now and everybody's hurt, you're like, okay, you know, maybe the healthiest team at the end of 2021 is who's going to win this whole thing. But it is not just one singular problem. This was a multi-tiered problem that is, you know, at the end of the day, complicated by the fact that there's all these COVID problems. You know, Boston had, in addition to being the most impacted team by COVID throughout the entire season, you know, they had Kemba Walker only for half the season. Romeo Langford, as you mentioned, comes back from the wrist surgery and gets COVID. You know, Tristan Thompson in COVID protocol, Jason Tatum in COVID. Like,
Fournier after the trade deadline.
You layer it all up and you get the perfect storm of 2020, 2021. And at the end of the day, when you look at basketball history, it's kind of like, yeah, no crap has happened to Boston. At the end, when you look at teams that are doing well, you have a cohesive 5 players on the floor with a distinct plan that, you know, has been, you know, hashed out throughout parts of the front office and in the coaching ranks. So Boston had a lot of problems this year because they never had any security. They never had any cohesion. They never had anything last for more than 10 days. So, you know, it's as
I get it that people, you know, they want to say, okay, who's at fault? They got to pick somebody. They got to pick something, you know, and it doesn't work that way, you know. And you know, like, there are people that are making a very good living by screaming and saying, this is the thing, and this is whatever. If someone's taken the time to read my junk, then, you know, I owe them that it's going to be, you know, like, I go back and teach at my college for a week every year. And everybody there, it's because if you look at the people that are being rewarded now in our business, in the media business, it's pundits largely. Mm-hmm. And it's like I said, well, first of all, you got to build up to the point where people give a crap about what your opinion is. I go, you know, look, I've been doing this for a billion years, and a lot of the time, I'm not even that impressed with what I think. I don't think, you know, a lot of times I don't want to know what I think. But here's the thing: if you're doing here's what I tell them. If you're doing sports talk radio, or if you're writing a column, which is what I basically was doing, you know, for a lot of time here. If you're doing one of those two things, you are allowed to give your opinion, but you owe it to the people who are listening to you, who are reading you. I mean, they're taking time out of their day, and, you know, and I never wanted to be. You know, I never wanted to discount that mm-hmm. part of it. They're taking time out of their day to read you. They're taking time out of their day to listen to you. You owe it to them that your opinion be based on a true story. You know, talk to people. Mm-hmm. When I talk about Brad Stevens and what I think of him as a coach, yeah, part of that is what I see. What I see him during games, what I see him, the plays he's drawing up, what I see him rotation-wise, what I get from talking to him about things, about how he looks at things. But it's also from talking to other people around the league, talking to other coaches, and not just, hey, I'm quoting you now, tell me what you think about Brad Stevens. And, you know, Brad could be an axe murderer and they're not going to say anything bad about him at that point, right? But I'm talking about, having conversations with a coach, you know, to the side, when we're not quoting here, when we're not, you know, doing stuff. And the regard in which Brad Stevens is held among his peers is incredible. And there are, I'll tell you this too, there are coaches in this league who are like major famous coaches who do not have, who you can easily, not hard to find people among their peers who just don't think much about them at all. You know, there's a lot of that around too. So yeah, people that, you know, are like big time quote unquote coaches that their peers, yeah, this guy really not much of a coach.
Although it makes me think back to this was a few years ago. We've probably even talked about this, and I know it's come up on the show in general, but a few years back when Brad Stevens Celtics, they had a great year, and it was, you know, relatively early on in his Boston tenure, and everyone was looking at Brad as, you know, just the best thing since Popovich and Phil Jackson and Red, and like he'd never won anything, obviously. Maybe had gone to a conference final at that point and gotten blown out by LeBron and the Cavs and that type of thing. But people were saying, you know, there was that big vote at the end of the year, the internal, you know, coaches voting for coach of the year among their peers, and Brad very deserving of coach of the year that year, even though he didn't win it, but he didn't have a single vote among his peers, and everyone was just equating that to, you know, well, they think he's overrated, or they're jealous, or, you know, it was all that, and then, you know, some of that stuff sort of dissipated, and what never went away, to your point, is just how respected, obviously, in general as a person he's been across the industry.
Yeah, I mean, you know, those voting things are always really strange when it's because a lot of trust me, a lot of the people, you know, if they do a vote among coaches, it's largely, I'd say, not the coaches themselves, the head coaches doing the voting. They say, yeah, have someone else do this. Which I don't know if you're going to bring up the Jason Tatum All NBA thing.
Yeah,
That was coming next. Look at that.
Yeah, I'll let you ask the question because I don't want to, you know, I don't want to cut off your airtime here.
I guess my question
might be getting paid by the word, and I don't want to screw you over on this.
No, my
No,
question
we're
is,
good.
you've had a vote for the All NBA teams in the past, correct? I would assume so.
I stopped voting for the NBA awards many years ago.
But you've done it, right? So you know the process and
Sure.
how much, you know, you hear Bill Simmons talk about it constantly. I take my vote seriously. It's like, well, I hope you do, right? Because there are guys that have actual, you know, money. Like, you just take us through the process that you would do to culminate, you know, to get all the information you would need to make what you thought was the right decision on these All NBA awards. I know it must be a little stressful considering, you know, the outcomes actually have some financial bearing on some of these guys.
Well, you just encapsulated the reason why I stopped doing it. I don't think it's ethical for media people to have a direct impact on the income of the people they're covering. I just don't think that's ethical at all. And I'm vice president of the PBWA, the Professional Basketball Writers Association, and I've brought this up on numerous occasions, but it's never been something that we've been able to do in a blanket sense. I think we should run from that. Back when I did vote, yeah, of course we took it seriously. And here's the other thing too, is that your name gets attached to your votes.
Mm-hmm.
So if you vote, if you cover the Celtics and you have a vote for MVP, and if Taco gets a first place vote for MVP, we know who you are. You know, and so trust me, I mean, look, Gary Washburn's a friend of mine. And, you know, a few years ago, and it was actually a Jeopardy question. Jerry Washburn got mentioned on Jeopardy. He was the only person who didn't vote for LeBron James for MVP, didn't give him a first place. People knew about that. So yeah, you take your votes, you know, people take their votes seriously. When you look at when hey, I've always looked at it like, again, number one, not ethical. Number two, we should sit back, let the players vote on these awards, and then, look at all the really cool, fun columns we'd have to write when they screw it up. Okay. I mean, because, it's what happens. The players may know the game and the ins and outs better, but they don't pay attention, I don't think, there are some players who are totally into watching all kinds of games. Like I remember a year before last, or Kemba's first year here, John Morant was coming into town as a rookie. And I pulled Kemba aside before the game. He gave me some time. And I said, look, I go, do you feel like an old gunfighter, and there's a new, guy coming in town to test you almost every night. Mm-hmm. And he went on and on about, yeah, I watch these guys all the time. I'm studying them, but I'm watching them. I think it's cool. And, but there's a lot of guys that they're in their own sphere, and, more power to them. They don't have to be, they're focused on their job, which is cool. So yeah, I think it's wrong that media votes on it, but I think that the media has, as much as it's put out there that, oh, they're not going to vote for somebody they don't like or something like that. These votes are public. You do see some screwy votes out there. And sometimes, and luckily we don't see that if there are Boston people involved, but sometimes the broadcasters in different cities who are, if not hired by the team directly, the team has right of refusal over that person. So, you've seen some strange votes over the years, but I think that the media is probably best equipped to get it right, and even to argue the issues. Like this year, did a guy play enough games to get, mentioned or to get voted on? Did, Kevin Durant, did he play enough or didn't he play enough? And, so there's that. Hopefully that encompasses what, the overall question, but.
If you can, to whatever degree, I guess you can take us behind the curtain, and I'm making it about the Celtics, but it's not about the Celtics. It's not about Wicks specifically and ownership there, just a team's mentality. Jason Tatum, obviously, in being an all-NBA snub, loses out on up to $32 million. Any team wants to have a player who's all-NBA, but that being said, when there's that kind of trigger within a contract, behind the scenes, is a team not that devastated that they're not having to pay that extra $32 million?
I would just, again, leaning on human nature, you'd have to think there's some of that. But that gets into the thing of, if you have GMs vote on stuff, then a GM, like a GM that is a Celtic competitor is going to say, oh yeah, we want Jason Tatum there because that's going to bollocks up their payroll. So yeah, I would assume that there was, but look, the Celtics are in a situation where, and they're very fortunate. And I think this kind of goes to something where people in the Boston area don't realize how, we're here in the wintertime, and it's like, I can't wait to get out of here. I want to go to Florida. I want to go here. I want to go there. And it just, I can't take another winter here and all this stuff. You go around the country, and even parts of, where I've traveled, outside of the country, people, you mentioned Boston, and it's like, oh, I love Boston. I've been there. I want to go back, or I haven't been there. I've got to go there. I really want to go there. People, appreciate Boston outside, and maybe that's just, again, human nature. You kind of, it's hard to appreciate what you live with every day. Sometimes you take things for granted. Mm-hmm. But in terms of basketball, which I think is why we're here,
as best we know.
Yeah, the Celtics are in a very fortunate situation that a lot of other places are not. The Celtics can take their time with the coach. Indiana, one and done for Bjorkgren. New Orleans, one and done for Stan Van Gundy. there are places where the franchise's health plays into decisions that get made about payroll, about coaching. Look, I think one of the best things you can do as a franchise is put people in place that are good people. You know, if you find someone that can't do their job properly, yeah, sure, get rid of them. But if you've got good people there, leave them there and let them do their job. It's like a television show finding an audience.
Mm-hmm.
You know, if you are going to change coaches, I mean, this is going to be the third coach in 3 years for Zion Williamson. Man's going to get whiplash.
Yeah.
If you got something that works, let it stay, because then players get conditioned to, hey, we got to solve this problem. You know, if you get a divorce every time someone drops a dish, you know, are you ever going to work things out? If someone's throwing the dish at your skull, then perhaps you think things. But stick with it, work it out. And I think that kind of stability plays really well for a franchise. The Celtics are in that position because even if the team is bad, they're still going to sell tickets. You know, some of the biggest engagement I had with readers has been in the years when the Celtics have been really bad. And fans still flock to, I like this guy, or I like this guy here. I mean, the bad teams, fans are still engaged with the Celtics. They still buy the tickets. They still watch the games. And that takes a load off the mind of an ownership. If you're in a Sacramento, you've got to worry about, hey, if we have a down year, am I going to lose, a significant percentage of my season ticket base? So you can make financial situation decisions out of stability, which is a great benefit to the Celtics. Look, the ownership here has been solid and steady since it took over. Okay. And you look around the league at how many other places. I mean, if this move hadn't happened, excuse me, he'd be one of the more tenured coaches in the NBA. Mm-hmm. And that's important. That kind of stability. I mean, look, if you look at where this team, has the changes that have happened in the last few years, you can look at a couple of events, and you look at what Ainge built. You mentioned that before, Evan. They had built the team that played Milwaukee in that series was a really, really talented team. Wasn't necessarily whole at that point, but Al Horford leaves.
Yep.
Okay, because money, but also because he wanted to play less center, play more power forward, and that didn't work out at all for him. But so he didn't leave because he didn't like. It wasn't because he didn't like Boston, but so he leaves for that situation where it's better money and all that. And then Kyrie,
what do you
say on that? I mean, just throw your hands up in the air.
Insert shrug emoji here.
Yeah.
But my God, is he a ridiculously talented player? Mm-hmm. Oh my God! I remember when the Celtics drafted Jason Tatum, and I was backstage at the draft in Brooklyn, and so I ran into Jason's agent, and he mentioned, Kyrie in passing during our discussion, and because we were talking about, does he have anybody else that could be with the Celtics? And Kyrie wasn't one of them, but he mentioned Kyrie in some of the part of the conversation. And the Celtics had just played the Cavs in the playoffs. And I remember the game that LeBron left because of foul trouble or something, and Kyrie just took over. And I just remember turning to the agent saying, and this is like really professional. I go, he's really good.
Yeah.
Like, whoa, is that guy good? But you had that kind of talent drain. Say what you want about Al Horford now at his age, whatever. But if you had Al Horford and Kyrie Irving and Gordon Hayward on a team, with Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum, you know, you're going to Vegas and loading up, right?
Yeah,
I
right.
mean, you
No
know,
question.
my God, it's a ridiculously talented team. Then you could have, you know, one of us could be the eighth man and we'd never see the floor, but
Sounds great.
you could end up with jewelry, you know?
Put me in the corner.
Last one for you, and then we'll let your knees go suffer with the run here. But just, and you could spend forever on this one. It's such a wide ranging kind of question, but I guess to drill it down, the playoffs in general, like you, I mean, we wish we had a longer sustained run by the Bruins to keep us entertained. We didn't expect it for the Celtics, but the teams that are playing right now, LeBron James is out there doing the I told you so stuff. Like this was what was going to happen, all the injuries and everything like that. You can't look at a team, a true contender, and not find a problem, whether it's obviously Brooklyn with, you know, Kyrie's uncertainty. Harden was effectively a 40-minute decoy the other night. You know, Durant had to take over. Kawhi there with the Clippers, Jazz to a lesser degree, Conley, Chris Paul, now with the COVID situation. The list goes on. I'm not saying any of that is good for the league. It's not. But just as a fan, it's certainly unique. Do you enjoy just watching a postseason where, because of all of this, there isn't that clear runaway contender, that clear favorite that's like, of course they're going to win the title. We don't have a clue who's going to win the championship right now, because any team that you feel strongly about comes with that if they stay healthy caveat.
Yeah, I mean, look, let's just take last night. Watching, you know, I'm watching Red Sox. My remote control has I had to put it in concussion protocol. Because I'm switching back and forth and I'm DVRing the basketball game in case I want to go back over it. Look, they're doing drama without a script. You know, that's what sports at its best is. You know, the Celtics and Lakers in the 80s, they were doing Shakespeare, you know, improv. I mean, I've always said that. And that's why people will tune in. They don't know, you know, I'm pretty sure by now I know how Wizard of Oz ends. But, you know, see, you watch that stuff. As far as the injuries go, yeah, that takes away that you're not seeing all the best players. But, you know, did you watch the Utah Clippers game last night? I mean, that was wild. Mm-hmm. You know, the ebbs and flows of that game. And Kawhi Leonard's not playing. And, you know, the much maligned Paul George goes off. You know, Marcus Morris, you know, old friend, you know, this guy is stepping up and playing big minutes. You got to watch because you know, I think I tweeted out, like, you know, why do you watch when a team is, you know, seemingly out of it and it's not a team that you follow? Because basketball. Yeah. That's why. You know, stuff's going to happen, you know. So, you know, but as far as LeBron's argument about that he saw this coming, I won't deny that he can be correct. But I will say this, do we have something we can put up there? This is the get off my lawn moment.
Sure.
Okay.
We'll Photoshop Clint Eastwood in here. It'll be great.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I'm not going to be talking to an empty chair anytime soon. I might, but in that case, there, you know, call someone for me just to. You know. But when the Lakers won 33 straight, it was at 71-72.
Sounds right.
Yeah. During that stretch of 33 straight wins. Remember a couple of years ago when the NBA came back from lockout and every team had to play 3 games in 3 nights, like once or twice or something? Mm-hmm. During that stretch where the Lakers won 33 straight games, they played 3 games in 3 days, 4 times during that stretch. So 12 of those wins, of those 33 wins, were part of 3 games in 3 nights. So that's obviously the first one doesn't matter so much, or the second, but the third one. So yeah, I'll just leave it at that, I guess.
Well, we'll leave it there with the show. I mean, so much obviously that we didn't even get into that we'll have to
I just want to
Steve,
say Tatum got robbed. That's all. That's it. That's all I want to throw out there. And then I'm done. Because we had even talked about the fact that Tatum got robbed. It's ridiculous, but hey, what are you going to do? Like we talk about names get attached to votes.
Yeah.
I had a bone to pick with a particular individual who had Jimmy Butler on the first team. I just don't understand that at all at first team forward. But hey, Tatum got robbed and he got robbed of 30 million, and that's ridiculous to me.
Well, so Evan, are you going to be organizing the bake sale?
Yeah, we'll get the $30 million bake sale. We'll start with lemonade. We'll go up from there.
Who's
Give me the
washing
most
the cars?
expensive lemonade you've ever seen in your life.
I think the DEA is going to want to check.
Yeah. We get a couple looks from a few people, I'm sure.
Yeah, when you see the Breaking Bad crew coming over, then I think it's probably time to
pack it.
Subscribe, rate, review, all that good stuff on iTunes, wherever you find your podcasts, obviously. But Steve, it's always a tremendous pleasure having you on. Matt Long of the Herald doing a great job still, obviously very plugged in with the league. And Evan Valenti, I'm Adam Kaufman. Thanks for being with us. Another Celtics Beat coming your way next week.